So warm welcome also from Anna and me, and thank you so much for joining. I saw just that there were 20s, late 20-something participants here, which is of course really great. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to Cornelia Brandner and Andreas Jansson from Geomedia at Karlstad University for inviting us to doing these seminars, and also to the speakers. We really look forward to hearing your presentation. So to start with, I'll just very briefly set the scene for today's seminars, which comes from, I guess, a long-standing curiosity, fascination that Anna and I have with influencers. And fortunately for us, we're in a line of work where we can also sort of turn our interests into the research and collaboration. So that's been really wonderful. So over the past years, we've seen how influencers have become increasingly powerful in both social, cultural, political, and economical terms. And they grew out of micro-celebrities and YouTubers from the 2010s and are gaining increasing visibility not only on their native social media platforms, but also in a range of other contexts. To begin with, influencers were primarily associated with what we might call ordinary people who monetized on posting from their everyday lives. However, more and more influencers now represent subcultures and niche perspectives that they then bring into mainstream of culture and politics. A prominent example is, of course, how influencers have contributed to the mainstreaming of populist far-right perspectives. So influencers develop new forms of authority by blurring the lines between expertise and opinion, and between knowledge dissemination and profit-driven business models. And they change the areas that they engage in from within, and at the same time, they also change how other actors within these areas operate. That's according to Bishop's notion of influencer creep, that influencer logic, so to speak, creeps into other areas. An example is how influencers have crept into the political realm. We saw that influencer, podcast host, etc., Charlie Kirk, the gentleman in the bottom picture, that he was part of the entourage of Donald Trump Jr. when he visited Greenland in January. And by so doing, Kirk was put in the position of being both outside and inside of the political establishment. At the same time, we also see that influencers assume formal positions of power. For instance, the most followed influencer in Greenland, Kapanak Olsen, has just recently been elected into the parliament. So in short, influencers change both how we talk and what we talk about. So in this seminar, I'm just going to mute my phone, sorry. So in this seminar, we're particularly interested in how influencers navigate algorithms and platforms that in different ways both empower and constrain them. We're also interested in how they assume popular forms of expertise outside traditional forms of and institutions of expertise. And finally, how they use communicative strategies of self-branding and authenticity. And finally, I'll end this introduction by saying that there's a special issue of Nordic Journal of Media Studies coming up, which dives deeper into these issues. The 3 papers that we'll hear today will be published in this issue, along with 5 other papers which cover a wide range of topics, including far-right masculinist influencers, male beauty influencers challenging traditional norms of heterosexuality and masculinity in Pakistan, we have grief influencers, and so on and so forth. So I think that is all I'll say for this presentation. And now I'm happy to leave the floor to the first of the, I'll just stop sharing. Oops. I'm happy to leave the microphone to the first paper today. And I should perhaps say before I do that, that we have set aside 15 minutes for each presentation. That leaves room also for immediate questions and also some discussion after each paper. And then perhaps if we have some final comments and questions, we can also sort of gather that in the end. But I'm happy to leave then the microphone for the first paper on influencers' autonomy, navigating authenticity, agencies, and algorithms. And that is co-authored by 3 authors who are all here today, which is really wonderful. That is Associate Professor Vilde Sundet from OsloMet, and Research Professor Kari Steen-Johnsen from Institute for Social Research in Oslo, and also Assistant Professor Møller Andersen from the University of Copenhagen. So the mic is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm just gonna open our presentation. Let's. Sorry, the mouse is not there. Now, you can see the screen and you can hear me. Yeah.
We are also seeing your notes. Vilde.
Yeah. Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Super nice.
Perfect. Thank you, Kari. And first of all, thank you, Mette, Mortensen, and Jerslev for arranging this one, and also for the special issue. That it looks great. So thank you so much for having us. And also big shout out to both Kari, Steen-Johnsen, and Møller Andersen that is here and written this. We agree that I will present it, but they will, help me if you get very hard questions and in the discussion. So this is the work of all of us. So we are starting our presentation with, we're starting it with the complex story about influencer autonomy. And we're saying that on the one side, often influencers are presented as just normal, real people sharing everyday lives and they're living, they have their passion projects, they're ordinary people, live ordinary lives. So that's one of the sides, saying really that they have quite a lot of control and power on how they want to present themselves and the life they have, the professional life they have. And on the other side, of course, you have the issue that is not really the fact, that influencers are also manipulative, they are strategic, they are opinion leaders, and they act like living billboards or commercial because of their commercial collaborations. So we're kind of asking on both these, in this story or the narrative about influencers, how much autonomy do they really have? And how is that autonomy shaped by different structures, the cultural, the technological, and the economic? So it's large questions, but they all comes down to control and power in one way. We define influencer autonomy based on studies on autonomy, not really in influencer studies, but more in work sessions and also in media industry work. And normally autonomy is presented as something that is very good, something that you should strive for and should try to get, and freedom, to decide how you want to work, how you act your work, and as a benefit. We also know that that is not always the case, and having too much autonomy means that you also have a lot of responsibility yourself. There is the concept of autonomy paradox, that the more you control yourself, the less you really control. And I think many academics can recognize the feeling that, you know, without the boundaries, life becomes, or professional lives become boundless. So we defined it as the sense of control and self-governing freedom that influences perceived in everyday life and work. When writing this article and presenting this work, we based on material done in a larger project that is called the Global Natives Project. We have done 28 interviews with industry informants that either make content that is popular with young or targeted towards young people. And we have 3 different sets of informants that have quite different perspectives, or at least see this influence autonomy from quite different places. So we have the influencers themselves. Some of them define themselves as content creators or profiles, but we will, just for making it a little bit simpler, call them influencers, although they will insist, some of them at least, to call them something else. Then we have the influencer management and agency bureaus and intermediaries that kind of live by the influencers, by advising them, being the professional system around them. And then we have legacy media executives that increasingly are wanting influencers and content creators because they make kind of a content that many audiences, especially young people, wants to consume. So that's the material we base on these different informants and how they see autonomy. More theoretically, we structured the article around the 3 A's, the authenticity, which is more the cultural system or structure that define influencer autonomy. We have the algorithms, that is the second A, that is connected to technology and platform power. And then we have the agency, which is more the manager, influencer manager. So we're looking at how are these 3 A's defining influencer autonomy. And yeah, thank you to Kristin Clay and also the Nordic Journal of Media Studies that have allowed us to pre-publish these articles. So we have uploaded one on our website if I'm going to rush through it and you would like to read it by yourself. So the first A is, of course, authenticity, and it's the common, it's a well theorized and well described concept in influencer literature. It's the currency to build intimacy. It's, you know, the real people with real issues, like some of the first influencer studies described it. It's also the fact that, you know, being authentic is something you do rather than something you is. So it's strategic and it's very much performed, and it's something that you do for many reasons, but by at least partly also to be consumed by others. So we know that authenticity is key currency within the influencer industry, but also creeped in, as Mette Mortensen said, in also other parts of the industry. In our material, we find, of course, a lot of expectations towards influencers being authenticity that also guides how they can act, how much control they have, and how they perform themselves. So we find a lot of expectations from followers and fans, but we also find it from legacy media wanting to collaborate with influencers exactly because they are authentic and present themselves in a different way. As one of the legacy informants that we interviewed said, we want to put the profile, so he's using the profile instead of the influencer term, the profiles and the content creator at the center of our content. Content should come from them. Most of the content I enjoy come from someone, not necessarily 12 people in a room with much laughter. So he presented us a more natural, a more personal, a more intimate way of making content. For the influencer, we talked about all of them would use the term authenticity, if I remember correctly, and had quite a strong sense of what that meant. And many also pointed to a balancing act, like one of the influencers we interviewed. For instance, these two that had this food channel that they operated as a couple, they would say that you know, they wanted to focus on the food and the cooking, but they also knew that they had to show that we are humans, as they said. So we are both gay and I have an immigrant background. People appreciate that we talk about these things because they might feel seen. We can be a role model for someone out there. So they kind of they know that they are presenting themselves as audience to build a stronger relationship with audiences and fans, and that they can get their message out by also sometimes showing a little bit of their personal lives. In our material, we find that, you know, the rules you have is quite different. Someone has quite strict rules, or at least a lot of rules that I would follow. Like one of the influencers we talked about, he was explaining how he had certain boundaries. He had rented a studio not to film in his own home. He would not show his family, and if so, he would put a balaclava on the face of his daughter, not to show her face. I do not want my choices to affect her, as he said. And then we had other, of course, that would say that there were no real natural separation anymore, that social media are with me from when I wake up until I go to bed. They are with me when my father dies. They will be there when there is ash scattering, and they are virtually with me to the gynecologist. Sorry. Many followers wish to see everything. If I had set up a 24/7 live stream, people would watch. So as you can see, the demands or the expectations for autonomy, for being authentic here, really put some strong structures about some of these influencers and how they should behave and how much they should share. That sharing is a choice, but it's also a very expected choice, something that you need to do if this is a living you would like to have. The second A is that we are looking at that also define autonomy and how autonomous you can work is algorithm. And again, this is also a very well theorized, well described field, also when it comes to influencers. And a lot of the literature that we have found very useful is the literature describing it as algorithm imaginaries or algorithm gossip, taking that algorithms are, of course, putting out a structure, a technology, defining the work, but also defining how influencers think about their work, because you have to have certain perceptions of what these algorithms do, because you never really know how you also have to think and guess how they work. So play the game, as some scholars have described it, play the algorithm game. And in our material, we see a lot of what we call algorithmic customization, that influencers would make certain customizations of their content to fit what they believe are the algorithm systems. And one of the most clearly one and common stated was that, of course, you know, you have to publish frequently and steadily. So as one of the influencer manager would say, if a profile has been absent from social media for a while, his or her reach will drop. They don't show up in their followers' feed anymore. So algorithms are important. To maintain a good algorithm, you must post frequently. It's a 7-day-a-week job. And many of the influencers also stress the same issue, that, you know, you have to post even if you have a good day or a bad day. The pictures I've collected here is not from one of the influencers that we interviewed. She is perhaps the most well-known influencer in Norway. But I think the examples are quite well, because it shows you, you know, she posts from her pregnancy, she posts her newborn baby, but she also posts commercials for air fryer in the same story on Instagram. So it's clearly showing that, you know, posting frequently is important if you have this idea that algorithm will punish you if you don't do so. But of course, we also had informants that would put questions, or at least criticize them, this way of thinking about platforms and algorithms. And many of them would also be stressed that they were worried about how unpredictable their life was, or their professional life and work was, because of platforms. So as one of the other influencers we interviewed said, platforms are constantly changing and it happens quickly. You must constantly adapt to algorithms in order to be shown to your followers, which inevitably has an impact on how you create content. It feels like we're heading towards something quite chaotic, where the one who shouts the loudest is seen. There is little room for nuances now, which feels like an omnibus development. So many of them also explain how they would, of course, be on as many platforms as possible to reduce risks, but also some would seek out more established, if we can call it that, media careers, trying to get work in the media, the legacy media industry, or also going into the events market, or writing cookbooks, or something else that they should have a more steady or more controllable platforms that they could operate on. And again, of course, the way platforms and algorithm work will also define their sense of autonomy, how much they can control of their everyday work and life. And finally, we get to the last and third A that we called agency, which could also be called managers, but it looks better with 3 A's than 2 A's and 1 M. So we call them agencies. This is one of the fields in influencer literature which is less described. There is some studies here as well, but they are less described. And they typically described influencer agency and managers that, the people working around and managing personal brands. They are gatekeepers. They manage, they control, and they measure influencers. Many of them sell influencers or negotiate deal with the commercial brands. They push them into casting agency, make sure they get on television on the right spot, help them with making a book contract or whatever. So, of course, not everyone has a manager, and typically it's the bigger you get, the more you would need an agency to help you, because it's a lot of work. And the agency will, of course, not take the less important one, because there is a business side on this. Agency have it says it's in the name. If you have a manager, you also give away some autonomy and some control of your work. So they have cultural and economic power, of course. The influencer we interviewed, most of them, if not all of them, had a manager, and many of them were, of course, very thankful for being represented by a management. But I also talked about the balance between professionalism and control. So 2 of the influencers that we interviewed, they described that they used to be by themselves, doing everything on their own, as they said, and then, as I will quote them, our email correspondence was piling up and negotiations were taking a lot of time. It was a relief to delegate the preparatory work to management and have someone to discuss ideas with. There is always someone available to provide constructive criticism. And then they said the downside is that it's an extra layer of communication is added to the transaction time. So you get something that you can discuss with, give you criticism, give you advice, but you also have something you have to listen to, or at least run things with. So it's interesting in terms of autonomy and control. Having this will be the same for everyone having a management or a leader. I would say that, it's, it's someone you have to run things through. What is quite specific to influencers is that it's both professional and then also at the same time very much personal. So on the one side, many of the informers we had would really stress that, to be a good influencer, to be a good management, what it is all about is professionalism. as one of the influencer manager we talked today is leading perhaps one of the biggest influencers bureaus in Norway. She said it's easy to get big, but it's hard work. Of course, it helps if you're creative and come up with ideas, but mostly it's about the fact that you must be willing to work. So she and many others, they would say, you know, a good profile or influencer is one listening to us, willingness to do the work systematically, to follow our advice. It's hard work, it's professionalism. And then on the other side, both influencer managers, but also people from the legacy media would stress that it's also very much personal work, because these people have to be authentic. They have to navigate platforms in an intimate way. So it's not, you know, it's not only work, it's also very much professionals. Personal. So one of the influencers we interviewed, she would call her manager not a manager, but a momager. That is a quote not from her, but from Kris Jenner, the mother of the Kardashian family. Explaining that, for instance, when she broke up with her ex, she would go to her manager, and that's where she would get support. So many also stress that, you know, being a good manager or having a good manager is getting the strategic professional work, but it's also being seen and being taken care of as a person, as an individual. And again, this is a balancing act. Where these influencers have autonomy, but can give some of it away to management in order to get advice and support and comfort, but also then, of course, giving some of the decision and power away. So, to summarize, we find that, you know, these systems, the 3 A's, they all restrain influencer autonomy in different ways. So they take some of their control and the power away from the influencers, but it's a balancing act. And by doing that, they also enable autonomy. So you can negotiate. If you have a good manager, you will perhaps get better offers, better deals, more control of your life. So it is a balancing act that takes something away from the autonomy, but also enable it. And the experience that the people we interviewed had varied quite a lot, as we have given some examples for. So it varies and depends on the influences, the role they have, the product, the agency, and the management that were represented to them. We also find that it's quite complicated, and this industry, as an emerging industry, is still being developed, and shifts will happen almost all the time. So these structures are not set, they are shifting. And we also find that some of the perspectives, when we take them from media industry studies, for instance, the concept of autonomy, that is the key for us. They need adaptations to really fit the personal aspects of influencers, because they are not media industries or media company. The personal is very much the defining factor of being an influencer, which make it a little bit different. I think that was all, and I think I've used my time, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Vilde, and also to the co-authors, Kari and Mads. I see now that there are 33 people in the room. That is so wonderful that you are attending today. Welcome to those of you who were not there when we said the welcome. And now we have a little time for questions, comments to Vilde, Kari, and Mads on influencer autonomy and the 3 A's. And how do we do it? Do people just burst out in the questions, or can you perhaps
raise your hand?
Raise your hand, yeah. Okay, we have a question, yes? Swat?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for the presentation, Vilde. It was very interesting for me, researching influencers as well. I mean, I have many questions, but I will just go for one that is the most intriguing to me is the ethics of researching an influencer. So I was wondering how you got around to doing that. There is the whole concept of lurking or stalking them online before even you start interviewing them or talking to them. So I was wondering how you navigated that. And also, for example, you mentioned earlier in your presentation you had screenshots from one of the influencers, but you didn't interview them. So even like including that screenshot in the presentation. So what is your take and your experience with that?
That is a great question. I can start since I've done the interviews, and then Mats and Kari can jump in because the ethical questions are general and universal. It's a great question. We aim to get a lot of very varied influencers, and I sent a lot of requests out. Influencers do not necessarily want to talk to researchers. They know that we may be critical. We take time. Time is money. Why should they care? So I sent out to the biggest one, at least many of the biggest one, and they all turned me down. The way that we got around in the project was that we went through the management. So we have the management helps us. So that means that our material is a little bit biased because of course they are quite happy with the management. They're all represented by a manager that works well. But they are still interesting. And so we waited, all the informants, also the influencers have, of course, read their quotes, and yeah, so they are all agree that we can use them in the publication and also elsewhere. And for the others, we tried to, I've included a few screenshots by some of the biggest influencers in Norway, and they have, hundreds of thousands of followers. So they're kind of talking to a larger public. I would not share as openly smaller influencers because, you have a lot of, I agree with you that there is the lurking and just taking what's quite intimate is not something scholars should do. But Kari and Mats, please jump in. You might have,
Yeah, I agree. It's a great question, and it's a great question both when studying these types of persons that are really like very public, but that may not still want to have this kind of publicity or expect this kind of use that the research might want to make of them. I've had use of. In Norway, there's this guide for internet research ethics that we may be aware of, and that forms some concepts that might be helpful in thinking about these things, and in particular the concept of expected publicness that I think might be useful here, and I think that applies to the fact that we display Sophie Elise. We may use her because we assume that she has a high degree of expected publicness in all that she's doing. But there's always this weighing to do. In what context do you discuss them? How do you present them? Which photos do you choose? Many questions, but and that need consideration specifically, I think.
Yeah.
I can also respond really quickly to this very good question. I think there might be something around influencers that make them a particularly tricky group to study here because they're already being approached by so many people, not only brands and managers, but also followers and users. And I think in that context, they're of course used to communicating with a lot of different people, but as Vilde says, their time is just consumed by already so many things that a researcher trying to get a hold of them might not be exactly what they're looking for. So I think this is a testament of the work that Vilde has done in building trust with these influencers, because it's relational work. And I think it's a very important part of studying media industries. So that's how you do it, but it's definitely not easy.
Yes, thank you. We have two more questions. First is from Anne.
Thank you for your presentation, Vilde. Mette and I have been discussing this idea of autonomy a lot. while reading and and editing your article, your great article, and where you're also very careful to talk about structures who are at once enabling and restraining autonomy. And you also say in your conclude in your article that the interviewed influencers still think that they are free and autonomous. So I guess so I guess actually my question would be, would they still think that? I mean, do you think there'll be some kind of development where influencers in time will think that they are actually more restrained than they are enabling to live their wonderful autonomous life as influencers? Yeah.
Yeah. This is a great question, and this is also something that I would really like Mats to comment on as well, since he knows the autonomy literature so well. I think our main argument is that the big narrative about influencers are that they are free, they are autonomous, and it's well described, and we all know this. And influencers also kind of have to believe in that, because why otherwise why should you be an influencer? The whole point is that you can choose yourself and you can do what you love. And then at the same time as they would say that, that I'm just sharing and this is just my life, they would also have these quite complex understandings of algorithms and management. And some of the quotes illustrate that they have a very thorough understanding of the structures, although they wouldn't say that. So I think I used a parallel for academic in the start. I think it's quite similar, that many of us do the things we love, but we also work a lot because there is so many structures guiding our lives.
We're also really strategic.
Yeah, we're also very strategic. That's right. Mats, do you want to jump in and say something?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting discussion. And one of the things we tried to bring into this was also theories from the studies of the psychology of work in general. And that I think we tend, especially in the study of media industries and creative industries, to perhaps overvalue autonomy a little bit and think that everyone must want more autonomy if they could. But in fact, studies from the psychology of work point to how it's more complex than that. It depends on your personality. It also depends on your career stage. It depends on the specific organizational role you have. And as Vilde says, for influencers, there's this big narrative around their life form as being very free and free to choose a lot of things. And I think the fact that many of them find a lot of comfort in having management is perhaps challenging that narrative a little bit. But they self-sustain that narrative quite a bit. So I think, but I wouldn't sort of necessarily think it's a bad thing. It depends on how you view autonomy. And I think usually the theories describe sort of an inverted U, where if you have too little, you're sort of unhappy in your work, and you have too much, you're also unhappy. So sort of finding a sweet spot, and that where that is can vary depending on who you are, would be my response.
Great, thank you so much. And we
Can I just jump in for?
Of course.
Or say, no, it's just I think Anna really points to something that I think is very important here, and that is that these are dynamic fields, and this is an emergent type of industry. So, which is perhaps becoming more professionalized, or the agency, that A is becoming more important. So I think the answer to your question will rely on how the 3 A's develop, how the technological, cultural, and agency or organizational system develop. So that was just.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we have a next, and I should also say final question from Andreas, and perhaps people posing questions to say who they are and university, etc. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steen-Johnsen from Geomedia. Thanks for the very interesting presentation, and also thank you to the organizers, Mette and Anne. I'd like to ask a question about one of the A's then, of course, the authenticity A. And I've found it really interesting that there is this experience that there are no limits to what one could share, and people still wanting to follow and to consume that, and in combination with the felt need to kind of feed into the algorithms and post continuously in order not to get invisible. So, I mean, the question against this background then is, well, if there are also some experience of a devaluation of authenticity through all this, that it's kind of authenticity gets exhausted and even turned into spectacle in some kind of dialectical process where if everyone would post everything, and I mean, then it's no authenticity left, so to speak.
Yeah, another great question that is well, I think yeah, that many influencers scholars write very nicely about, more nicely than we do in our article as well, and that Anne and Mette also write about in the introduction to the special issue. That so this is the key for influencers in influencer studies, because you know they are authentic, but at the same time it's very non-authentic. Many of them live by making commercials, having collaborative doing collaborations with the commercial. They post all the time. We know they post all the time. We know that it's performed, and still it is somewhat authentic nevertheless. But what was very clear in the material is that, you know, that the influencers, when they are on their own platform on social media, they have to negotiate, you know, how much privacy they want to show off themselves. I showed you, or we showed you a few examples. One of them, you know, posting when her father died, and the other one not even wanting to be home. I think there's two very different strategies of how to be authentic. But we also see in the material, and that is perhaps one of the things that we bring clearly, at least, that also the legacy media industry wants these people because they are authentic. That's why they want to have them in reality television, in entertainment show, on radio, as podcasters, because they know they have this performed authenticity that is what not only young people, but people spending a lot of time in digital culture expect from people making content. We expect people to be profile and show somewhat personal side as well. Yeah, I don't think that was an answer to your questions, but I kind of got carried away somewhere else. But it's a good question, and I think yeah, Jerslev and Mette Mortensen could answer this as, yeah, I think better than me as well.
We would love to if you had time.
It's one of our favorite topics, but I think we shouldn't get carried away now, because we have the next paper coming up. And I should say thank you so much to Vilde, Kari, and Mads for this very interesting presentation, and also for great questions. And the next paper coming up is the expertise of financial influencers and strategies of calibration towards monetization, by Andreas Gregersen and Ørmen, who are both associate professors from the University of Copenhagen. So take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you see, this is not me, if you can see sort of the title slide? Okay, Vilde is nodding, that's good. So I'll just see if I can sort of navigate around my screen here. So yes, thank you very much. And I wanted to start by thanking the organizers for giving us the opportunity to do this. That's both Mette and Anne and Cornelia. I also want to thank Mette for the introduction, because it sort of outlined a lot of the reasons, I think, and the keywords that why we find this interesting. And also, of course, sort of my head is spinning from all the stuff that Vilde just sort of present it. So, but I'll stick to our own slides here, and we can sort of hopefully touch upon some of the connections that may be in the presentation, but maybe also some of the stuff that's left out if we have time. But my name is Andreas Gregersen. I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Jakob Ørmen, and we're from Department of Communication. So I'm just going to basically outline sort of what the main argument in the article is, or the main delivery is, a typology of 4 financial influencer strategies. And we talk about financial influencers, but we also sort of shorten that to finfluencers. It's sort of, that's not our idea. It's sort of a way to talk about these types of influencers. It's an under-researched type of influencer, and I hope to also present a little bit of what makes them distinct. So it's a typology. We have 4 strategies, and the typology is based on 2 types of expertise. It's everyday expertise, one might say, which is a little bit difficult to define. Again, there are people in the room that would be better at defining that than I would, but we're drawing on some of that work. Everyday expertise, and then sort of something that's a little bit easier to identify, namely financial expertise, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we do that, but we also argue for the utility of what we call calibration towards monetization as sort of the overall configurational logic within this field, in a way, of analysis. But before I get to that typology, I want to sort of give a little bit of context on influences. Of course, we've already had some, but I think sort of I'm just going to summarize what we see as sort of some of the main assumptions underlying this sort of. So one is that sort of influencers are typically seen as brand promoters. So this sort of, in a way, also this discussion about, are they influencers? Are they creators? What are they? And we're sort of seeing that sort of influences, sort of not a hard definition, but just when we talk about influencers, we're usually talking about individuals that are seeking to monetize their activities in some way. Typically, these activities are on social media, but they don't need to be isolated to that. But we're typically talking about activities on social media that are sought to be monetized. So the standard model, one might say, is to monetize through brand-oriented content promotion and affiliated sales. And now we've seen the 3 A's model, and yesterday we sort of came up with this sort of POP model, sort of the promotion of other people's products. And there's an asterisk there because that's not in the paper. It's kind of a joke, but it does kind of summarize very distinctive trait of the typical influencer model, basically sort of that. So kind of a joke, but promotion of other people's products is central to a lot of what the standard influencer does. And that kind of creates a conundrum for a lot of influencers, in the sense that they end up being dependent upon both brands and the platforms that they're on. And many of them sort of, so the standard model basically creates both platform and brand dependency. And to remedy that dependency, many creators sort of do other things. So sort of a key sort of sub-model here is to sell merch, and but they also tend to build their own product brands themselves, very often related to their original content niche. So if you're a beauty influencer, you develop your own beauty product. If you're sort of into kids and momfluencing, you might sort of make a sort of children's clothing brand, or you might do gaming peripherals and these kinds of things. And we find finfluencers are particularly interesting here because they offer sort of very specific examples of this type of strategy to get out of the brand and platform dependency kind of trap, in a way. At least that's how we see it. It's not the only reason why they're doing this, but they've developed business models that are a little bit sort of different from the POP model. So that's the background sort of assumptions. But of course, our paper is basically also about sort of expertise, that is sort of what role does that concept play in our analysis of financial influencers. And I'm going to talk about that now. And I'm also going to talk about sort of what do we mean when we say this calibration towards monetization. So on expertise, so we start with some of the work that Lewis has been doing back in the 2000 and somethings, sort of on this idea about popular experts. So this type of expert is still an expert in a specific domain. So the person knows something about something and has certain expertise. That could be cooking. Sort of that's not a completely sort of randomly selected example. So this person knows something about cooking. He's an expert in cooking, but is also an expert at being relatable and ordinary through some kind of connection with everyday life. And this is sort of very much a performative thing. It's a performance, yeah. And so basically sort of this theory is the theory that explains not so much who is Jamie Oliver, but more like what is Jamie Oliver. So this is also sort of a theory that was developed very much sort of in tandem with sort of developments in broadcast television. Also, of course, the press, but very much sort of television. So it predates work on influencers. But we've also looked at some of the stuff that has been done on influencers, and we've sort of some keywords here: accessibility, calibration, and spectacle. So I'm just going to go through 4 of the sources that we sort of lean on here. So the first is what we have called, and I don't think Annie uses that word, but it's sort of the work of Jerslev from 2016, sort of what we called accessible expertise, basically expertise in being accessible, sort of where her sort of in-depth case study of Zoella sort of outlines all these performative strategies for balancing something that's still extraordinary and interesting to watch, but also sort of ordinary and relatable. So you could also say it's sort of expertise in being relatable, basically. So then there's sort of Crystal Abaddon's work on calibrated amateurism, as she calls it, sort of, which is basically sort of an outline of strategies where influencers seek to stay relatable through a kind of performance of amateurism. This might be sort of dropping the phone or sort of having sort of that it not really scripted and all these kinds of things. So that's what you call calibrated amateurism, that these people are actually professionals, but they're kind of calibrating an element of amateurism into their sort of performances. Jessica Maddox has picked up on that recently, more recently at least, with her notion of calibrated expertise, and her sort of case study. It basically sort of, because that it's so she's looking at a veterinarian, a doctor for animals, where the idea is that that sort of particular type of influencing takes calibrated expertise, where that person has to balance professional credentials, basically sort of that he's still a sort of an academic and a doctor and a vet. So he has to balance that professional credential with being relatable as well. And then finally, we have what we would call sort of spectacular expertise, which is from Alex Prater's work, which is specifically sort of targeting not so much influencers, but financial experts and financial expertise. And his work is important for what follows, in that he's sort of showing that in order to perform financial expertise, this is often done through what he calls unfaultable talk. You could also call that sort of impeccable talk or impeccable performances, where these professionals have to sort of present a very sort of carefully calibrated professional sort of manner, where what we say is absolutely true because we know how the economy works and these kinds of things, which stands in some contrast to this idea about sort of, being an amateur and very relatable, and oops, I just dropped the phone. So you would never see sort of a financial expert on television sort of act like that. So that element is important. So to sort of, basically summarize sort of, okay, so what does that have to do with influencers and financial expertise? Well, we're kind of assuming that all of these financial influencers have this particular domain expertise, finance. They know something about finance and economics, and they have to, in a way, perform that. But they also have to have some level of expertise in being relatable. Like they have to relate to their audience, and they often do it by connecting to some everyday experience or something like that. But those are the 2 things that sort of financial influencers need to be good at. So they basically have to sort of give this calibrated balance of financial expertise and everyday relatable expertise. And this is in some contrast to traditional influencers, because financial influencers may need to, at times, or just basically go all in on this performing the financial expert with elements of impeccable and unfaultable talk, where they sort of adopt that sort of thing, which is not very influencer-like, actually, sort of these sort of people who are sort of sharp and in suits and are not like talking to the audience in a relatable way, but are presenting facts about the economy. So there's that. Then we have sort of this calibration towards monetization, and we're sort of trying to say that this is a sort of an overall configurational concept. So expertise will typically be calibrated towards audience relationships. So we've done that bit. So we also try in the article to extend the notion of calibration to cover the overall configuration of elements in the influencer strategy. Why are they trying to calibrate everything? Well, they're trying to calibrate sort of things to achieve a sustainable business model. And this is what we call calibration towards monetization. So in a nutshell, influencer performance of expertise is part of an overall calibration towards monetization of products and services tailored to a specific audience. And very often, these are not following the pop model. It's very much sort of selling their own products, and not always the case, but this is what we typically see. And this is where I will switch to presenting the typology of 4 different influencer strategies. So I want to say here right now that what we're trying to present here is sort of like typical strategies, not necessarily typical influencers, in the sense that there are some influencers who follow one main strategy and there are others that combine them a little bit. But the strategies here sort of are strategies. The typology consists of strategies, not influencers. But we nonetheless call the first strategy the influencer classic. This is sort of one of the primary sort of properties of this strategy is that it's characterized by sort of low financial expertise, or at least not a lot of financial expertise, but then high everyday expertise. So this is typically done with brand deals and promotion of external brand partners, for instance, financial actors such as Nordnet. So it's very sort of this is a strategy that's open to more traditional influences. Basically, they're very good at sort of relating to people in their everyday lives, and they might not know that much about stocks, but they might sort of be selling sort of Nordnet, which is one of the dominant Nordic sort of actors of these kinds of sort of having it's called an aktiesparekonto in Danish. Sort of it's a stocks savings account, which is sort of a little bit of a weird concept there. But these people are trying to sort of make this much more popular. So they may at times borrow some financial expertise through collabs, and this example is showing that, where sort of Hello Sophie and moneymom.dk are sort of collaborating on something here. But the important thing for the influencer classic is that there really are no financially related products and services by the influencer themselves. Hello Sophie is a fairly sort of traditional high-level influencer in Denmark. She's an expert in sort of being sort of a relatable mother, and she also has a web shop that sells children's clothes on the side. But she does nothing within the financial space herself. If she wants to do something there, she either says, I don't know very much about this, but you should think about it, or I'm collaborating with someone who knows a lot about things. And Money Mom here is actually sort of part of the next sort of strategy. She's pretty much doing that. We call that sort of being an academy operator. This is more characterized by high levels of financial expertise. That means that this is a strategy that only really works, as far as we can see, if you know something about finance. You still have to have sort of like some level of everyday expertise. You need to be relatable, but you don't need to be it in the kind of influencer kind of way. The products and services here are directly related to finance. They typically are sold through academies for learning, but it also means that people are running coaching sort of sessions or consultancy one-on-ones, people that are willing to sort of look at your economy sort of and give you tips for money, sort of book a talk or schedule a meeting or these kinds of things. So there's a very strong emphasis on your own products. Sometimes that's supplemented with brand deals, for instance, Nordnet, again, sort of these big platforms that allow for these kinds of financial transactions, but the emphasis is on your own products. So our example in the paper is Female Invest, which is probably sort of the most successful sort of company of this kind in Denmark, but we also have Money Mom, who's also reasonably successful. It's more sort of, she has a slightly more sort of, I think, mix of the strategies. And then we have sort of in the paper as well, Daniel's Pengetips, and that was the smiling guy on the intro slide. And we present these to show that they're gendered versions of the same underlying model here, which is sort of, in a way, very much geared towards finance and very much geared towards selling your own product portfolio, that sort of learning and consulting. And that's probably sort of the main type of financial influencer out there. Then we also wanted to sort of bring in something from the rest of our work, where we look at someone who is sort of actually a very important sort of type of financial influencer, but might not be known to the world as sort of the typical influencer. This is what we call the platformized trader. These are people who need very high financial expertise and actual sort of also pretty high financial skill sets, in the sense that they need to be able to trade and invest without losing their savings. But that also means that they need really very minimal everyday expertise. The monetization here is somewhat complicated to go through, so I won't talk too much about it today. But it typically means that these are embedded in retail platforms such as eToro, but they also sort of monetize their own stocks and maybe even a crypto portfolio and these kinds of things, sort of high risk sort of portfolios. The reason why it's interesting in this case is both because it's an interesting case for those of us who care about these things, but also like this is where we find sort of clear elements of unfaultable talk and a kind of Wall Street persona that does not need to be that relatable to normal people. Our example is Jeppe Kirk Bondi on eToro platform. He's the biggest, most copied investor on eToro. And you can see sort of he's moderately relatable. This is how he looks. So he's smiling, but he's also wearing a suit. When he does his own sort of shareholder reports and these kinds of things, the whole thing is very much sort of in a suit, and there's no like, have you had a nice morning? All these things. No, it's all about quarterly earnings and all these things. So that's that. And then finally, something that we sort of stumbled upon while we were doing sort of our sort of work on this, is what we call the veil promoter. So this is a difficult thing to summarize, but it's sort of first of all, that sort of in terms of expertise, sort of there's a very low financial expertise here, and Jakob and I actually sort of call it anti-expertise because it's kind of an espoused and much communicated, I don't know anything about this, but there is a business opportunity here. So that also means that these people have sort of very low expertise on the finances, but they have very specific everyday expertises. They're very good at connecting with certain element of youth that might be sort of somewhat alienated from everyday life. And sort of, as you can see here, this is a TikTok post. You felt so lost. You hated your 9-to-5 job. You were partying all the time, and you decided to quit it all, take your life seriously, become an entrepreneur instead. So this is a hook in a way. So there's a complex mimicry of influencer content and also classic influencing, and also the academy model and consultancy. Drop your IG and get a talk with me. Here's another example. Sort of here's an opportunity tonight at 20. You can learn what I do. I'm so successful. Drop your Instagram handle. And as the sort of the bullet here on the slide sort of is actually the business model is actually multi-level marketing and a pyramid scheme kind of model. So it's quite predatory and has really sort of influencing as a front for something else. But they are sort of quite important in terms of sort of financial content on TikTok. So yeah. Then I want to talk a little bit about two sort of questions that might have some interest in terms of sort of, I did say that sort of influencers are kind of under-researched, so I want to talk a little bit about how distinct are they compared to sort of ordinary influencers, and what about their cultural impact, which was sort of very much sort of signposted by you, Mette, in the introduction, sort of that, sort of what are these people doing? And we think they're reconfiguring a lot of things as they go. And I'm going to ask and answer the question in one slide, which is ridiculous, but sort of it's done to save time. So I think the influencer classic is probably the least distinct influencer strategy because it overlaps a lot with what we know as normal influencers or the standard model. We do believe that they're quite important cultural intermediaries, both in general, but also in terms of finance, because they have this large reach and they have this sort of they're very, very good at that calibrated everyday expertise. They're very good at selling these products in a way where they seem natural. Sort of everybody should have a stock saving account. That's kind of the discourse that you see here. And that means that in terms of sort of reconfiguring the space of expertise and financial expertise, these are actually quite important, even if they're the least distinct sort of influencers in a way, because they have such a broad reach and they have that everyday thing. The academy operator is probably the most distinct influencer strategy that with all of that sort of financial expertise and the products and the coaching and these kinds of things. And let me look at your everyday economy and I'll give you some tips for this. We think that they're relatively important in terms of cultural intermediary sort of intermediation. I mean, they have a lot of expertise. Many of them are sort of coming from jobs in the bank sector. They have comparatively low reach, but we think they're important for understanding developments in financial advice and consultancy because they're a big, no, not a big, but they're a reasonably sort of important threat to the normal way of doing business within the banking sector in Denmark. The platformized trader is a very niche influencer strategy, and they probably have very low impact as cultural intermediaries. Not a lot of people know about this. They don't follow them. They're not big on the big social media, but we think they're very significant in terms of platform partnerships. But there are some really important sort of entanglements, one might say, with sort of various platforms for that influencer strategy, which is under-researched. And then finally, the veiled promoter is not really a influencer at all, but it's just a really sort of complex case in the way that they mimic all of these different influencer and finfluencer strategies to drive what is really a predatory pyramid scheme. So we have some indication also through focus groups that this has already had a kind of impact with the kids in schools because they're targeting like 18-year-olds. But it's also gotten some media coverage recently with these kinds of modern day pyramid schemes. And if you ask Jakob and I, we're probably sort of our money is on this becoming sort of more widespread, sort of at least the next version of these things, that people are using something that looks like influencing to drive something that isn't really the traditional influencing model. But that's really all. And thank you so much for giving us this opportunity and for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Andreas and Jakob. We can silently clap here. it's it's a wonderful, great paper, and I think it really puts the financial side of influencing to a point in many ways. Yeah, it's really, really, really interesting, fascinating case, and a great paper as well.
Thank you.
So, questions and comments? Yes, Squad. SWAT, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah. Again, thank you for a very interesting presentation. And I mean, I'm not surprised that that's an understudied group. There are so many groups now of influencers, so some will be missed. My question is, you talked about expertise, and that's also how they've been categorized. Is there anything about credentials in terms of this category of influencers? We know that there are some where it does matter to have credentials. And I mean, I've personally come across people just talking about their own finances, and then people make them into these experts, and then they start following their advice. So is any of these categories relying on the person having credentials, having studied finance, or working in the finance world?
Yeah, I think that varies a lot with what kind of strategy you follow, because I think initially we thought also sort of, okay, so this is very performative in the sense that people are just saying sort of, I know stuff about finance, and there are that type of sort of person in this space, obviously. But I think the dominant strategy for instance, the academy operator is to play up sort of credentials in some sense that sort of that I have worked in the sector for quite a while. So the most successful ones in Denmark, and I think this also, they have a reputation to protect. So they do have like 18 years of experience from working in the bank sector, or maybe 5 years or something like that. So clearly they're signaling that. Now, Jeppe Kirk Bond on eToro basically lives off of his portfolio. It's public and open, so you can basically see how well he's doing. So the metrics there are open, and the platform sort of in a way scaffolds that. So he also lives and dies in a way by his reputation, but the reputation is a little different. He doesn't sort of have a diploma on the wall like Jessica Maddox's doctors might have. So this is more like sort of, I know my way around my stocks portfolio. My earnings have been up like 10%. I'm performing way above market. I don't know, Jakob, I don't know if you have sort of something to add to that about this. We talked quite a bit about sort of how you...
No, it's a great question, and it's it actually speaks to a fundamental debate in the literature on expertise, because you have on one hand credentials, and then you have, for instance, track record, which is not necessarily the same thing. And what we see play out here is that in some instances you can use credentials to build up authority. For instance, by showing you've been employed by a bank, or you have this and this degree. In other instances, it actually works against you, and then it's more about track record. So, for instance, Daniel's Pengetips, the front picture that Andreas showed, he's known for being kind of just the guy, one of the guys that made it on the stock market at the right time. Well, he bought Tesla at a lucky point. And that's part of his pitch, is basically to show his track record, but at the same time downplaying his credentials, saying that like, you can do this as well. And a lot of the financial influencers, including also the veiled promoters, then use a lot of energy on being relatable in their lack of credentials, but showing track record. For the veiled promoters, a lot of the track record is fudged. That's fake track record they showcase. And in other instances, it might actually be true, but they use it as a way to gain, I would say, actually gain authenticity towards their primary audiences.
Yeah, very much so. I think one of the really big sort of international Danish finfluencers is Hustle Phil, who is like a hustler, obviously. And I think he's sort of, in a way, calibrating that as well. But there's very much an emphasis on, I live in Dubai, I have this Lamborghini. I think those are sort of very high-profile cases, but we were also sort of trying to be a little careful with sort of also speaking about sort of some of these very serious sort of financial influences. Also, this is very much focused on Danish influencing, but also in the United States, we have sort of some very serious sort of, I think, sort of also sort of almost activist sort of influencers that are sort of quite serious about serving underserved publics and these kinds of things. And they might have some of that story as well, right? That sort of, I have no sort of formal credentials, but I know my way around this. I've been doing all these things. So it's a really interesting question. It's also about what kind of capital you bring to this game.
So we have a fourth A then, amateurism, perhaps.
Yeah.
Cornelia, you have a question?
The A's are my point. So you talked about relatability, but what is about the authenticity when it comes to influencers? Because I think there aren't really like possible levels or grades of authenticity in the context for them to like sell their products. So I mean, is it the way that if influencers, hard word, aren't perceived as authentic, people don't trust them, and trust is the currency then when it comes to investing money, right? So that's a question.
No, I think it dovetails directly with the previous question in the sense that they have to perform a particular type of authentic persona. And I think basically our calibration of expertise is our way of dealing with that in a way that that the calibration of those two things are really the way that they try to perform an authentic persona in a way that in order for Jeppe Kirk Bond, he has to perform like an authentic trader investor persona, and that involves like showing that he knows what to do. Whereas Hustle Phil needs to be authentic in that kind of smart ass way where he's just like, don't care about those things. Let's come see my Lamborghini. Isn't it great that I can just like call these guys and they'll come refuel it? Look at it. So they're very much in a way trying to connect with various publics. And I think there's a clear class and gender element to this. We know from other people's work that many influencers are quite gendered in their appeals, and we see that very, very strongly with the veiled promoters that we've seen, that particular pyramid scheme was targeting young women. So they had a very particular way of interpolating their audience as a I can relate to this, but there are other pyramid schemes operating in Denmark that are more masculine in their approach. This is super fascinating, and we can talk for like hours about that gendered appeal structure as well. But I think I just want to say that that it's often the case that the calibration that we were talking about often involves what other people call authenticity. Absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Delicate balance.
Great, thank you. Anne?
Do we have time for one more?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we do.
Yeah, it's a bit along what you were talking about here, Andreas, about the gendered appeal structure, but I was actually more interested in, or maybe just would like to ask you to say a bit more about the gendering of this field, because we know that there are many more female influencers than male, and you have in your presentation you forwarded the female invest and the moneyman.dk. So I was just wondering, how many female influencers are there? How many male? That's of course a stupid quantitative question, but could you say a bit about it?
I don't think it's it's just basically a quantitative question that I can't answer. But I think I don't know whether this is an artifact of the high profile cases that we've been tracking, but I think in Denmark, there are actually the most serious influencers are, I think, female accounts in a way. That there is a predominance of female influencers in the finance space that are of the serious type, the kind of academy operator that are banking on basically staying in business, like a long-term sustainment. I think that's a little different if we look at the hustle fill bracket where you get fast money, fast cars, and also like a fast burning through of the customers. So that seems more masculine coded, but I would say that the female coded or female gendered pyramid scheme that we've been looking at is also about fast cars and a lot of traveling and these things. So there are some markers of success that are pretty much non-gendered. It's just about getting a lot of money for doing what you want. So there's also a promise of freedom, I think, in influencing in general. We talked a little bit about that. But I really don't know what the quantitative distribution is. I do want to say that I think, again, there are probably maybe more prominent men in this space that there is in other types of influencing that has been well described. If we look at Brogarian Duffy's work, Emily Hund's work, Ashley Mears's work, a lot of them focus on the sort of female-focused verticals like beauty, fashion, these kinds of things. And I think sort of finance is traditionally male-coded. So I think the first sort of financial influencers were probably sort of, and the most successful ones are still male. But it's a niche that has, I think, a lot of potential for serious female influencers as well. They've been doing very well in Denmark as far as we see.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if you have something to add.
Can I add a short comment, Mette? Is there time for one?
Yes, there is.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question, Anna, and it's one we've been debating back and forth because it's so difficult to get an overview of the field, so to speak, right? But my sense is that it varies a lot on the type of financial influence they're trying to convey. So the more you move into trading, so trading of financial assets, the more male-dominated it easily becomes. The more you move into kind of everyday handling of finance, the more likely you'll find kind of the ones we also showed here, the kind of influencer classic models, which will target more women. And there's also, like, in general, and we see that in international literature, a push towards, like, there's a clash between kind of influencer values and then the traditional finance area, which has been so male dominated and still is, even in Denmark, where they spend a lot of resources on trying to push women to be more independent in terms of handling their own financial resources. But there's such a big gap here, and there's a lot of influencers that seems to see that as that gap is an opportunity gap, so to speak, right? To move into that and speak directly to female potential investors.
Great. Thank you. Time is running really fast, and we have to move to the next paper soon. But just one final and perhaps short question and short answer. Mariana?
Yes, I'm Mariana from the University of Karlstad. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this presentation, and I'm really glad somebody's researching on that, especially because I found out about female invest, and that's how I got into thinking about money and all. I just wanted to ask if you guys are going to continue researching about this. And that's my question.
Yeah, the short answer is definitely. But I think sort of it's in a way there's some things that are very specific about finance, and I think sort of there are people who know much more about that than we do, right? That sort of, but also this is changing fast with all the platformed infrastructures and these kinds of things. So there's a lot of overlap between other areas of work like platform labor and sort of core influencer studies and sort of platform work. So yes, we are definitely sort of trying to keep looking into this, and we're also doing some work to try and find out how sort of Danish youth actually reacts to this, like talk to people who sort of interact with these kinds of things. We haven't done that very much yet. We've run 4 focus groups, and so we hope to do more.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much to Andreas and Jakob for this presentation, and also thank you for the questions.
Thank you all.
Now on to the final paper of this afternoon by Associate Professor Heidi Hirsto from University of Vasa and doctoral researcher Cecilia Jerpe, also from the University of Vasa. And it continues, I believe, along the lines of investment, but with a slightly different focus. It's called Relevance, Commitment and Impact, Aspirational Formulation of Investing-Related Influencer Collaboration in the Context of Ethical Fashion. So take it away.
Thank you. Can you see it now? Yes. I just need to mention that we are currently also studying female-to-female influencers. So it was very, very intriguing to hear about your work also. But this is a different study. So I'm Heidi and this is Cecilia. And yes, we examine in this study aspirational formulations of investing-related influencer collaborations in the context of ethical fashion. So this is a very multifaceted, complex phenomenon where the familiar influencer domain of fashion is connected to broader ethical considerations and also to the ideological aspects of investing and ownership?
So we are approaching influencers as operating at the intersection of the political and the promotional. So there is, of course, an emerging field of research that looks at the promotional politics of influencer communication and examines how influencers' promotional activities are then intertwined with political and ideological aspects. And this is especially prominent in these politicized platforms. Instagram is a good example of a platform where this kind of commercial and effective content circulate in close connection with the political and ideological spheres. And as part of these logics, the roles of influencers are also shifting and diversifying. While their work has traditionally been considered as influencer marketing, so influencers are thought of as acting as billboards or endorsers from a consumer position. But nowadays their role as these like entrepreneurial actors, for instance, as bloggerpreneurs or as co-creators, is increasingly acknowledged. And as we approach this end of the political end of this continuum, in this paper we are drawing on Johanna Arnesen's idea of influencers as ideological intermediaries who mediate not only taste or commercial messages, but also broader value systems and worldviews and specific lifestyle, for instance, sustainable lifestyles. And influencer culture is, of course, also creeping into the field of activism. And these tensions then between promotion and politics have become particularly visible with the emergence of these activist influencers. As activism is, of course, usually considered something very serious and something that has a lot of weight. And influencing them is often regarded as a feminist and trivial practice. And these kind of questions around gender and power have, of course, been addressed through looking at their work as a specific kind of digital labor. And these concepts of aspirational and affective and authenticity labor relate to these ideas of influencers doing what they love and hoping to get paid for doing that and promoting things they love and are passionate about. And then they are also tasked with building an authentic self and building effective relationships with their communities. So all of these different labors are at play when these influencers balance their work as commercial partners on the one hand, and then simultaneously seek to answer these audience expectations of them being consistent in and true to their values and ethics. So our starting point here in this paper, especially as we are looking at influences in the field of fashion, which is a very contested and socially sanctioned one, is that influencer work is increasingly defined through their ethical aspirations, as the influencers seek continued relevance and legitimacy as mediators between socially oriented companies and conscious consumers.
And in this setting, for this fashion influencers, connecting to the broader ethical turn that has taken place also in fashion, can be seen as has been seen as an opportunity. So by choosing to collaborate with ethical brands, for example, influencers can communicate, but also enact and develop their ethical orientation personally, but also publicly as a community and in a community. So to this kind of established bundle of ethics and fashion, these investing related collaborations with ethical brands add another layer or ingredient, the cultural meanings of investing and ownership and finance. And in comparison to consumption and fashion consumption in particular, investing is often considered to have some cultural prestige and political weight and importance, which may be appealing to these influencers. But at the same time, the meanings of investing are not always easily compatible with the fashion consumption and ethical fashion discourses. Investing may appear as a foreign or technical or masculine and requiring formal expertise, which these actors do not have. Or investing and finance may evoke negative connotations of greed or exploitation, which may be at odds with the ethical orientation. So in making sense of these investing-related collaborations, influencers need to draw on the discourse of investing quite selectively, perhaps downplaying some of the traditional aspects and emphasizing the rather more marginal identity-related and social media-specific meanings of investing and funding. So one of the main objectives in our analysis was to find out how exactly influencers use this discursive resource of investing and how they connect it to their ethical aspirations as influencers, and how these articulations potentially shift the meanings of both investing and fashion influencing.
We analyzed 2 cases in this paper where lifestyle and fashion influencers run collaboration campaigns with these ethically oriented fashion companies. So both of these campaigns are investing related, but in slightly different ways. Olovia here on the left side specializes in sustainable accessories made from leftover materials, and their campaign was with a group of influencers and media personalities who had invested in the company and also designed a special bag collection for the brand. So there is an element of co-designing, which is then combined with the influencers becoming new shareholders of the company and also announcing this. And then Ivalo on the right is an online marketplace for ethical fashion, and this company ran an investment-based crowdfunding campaign where it utilized influencer collaboration with fashion and lifestyle bloggers. So here the influencers not only reflect on their own reasons for participating in the crowdfunding, but then also invite their followers to participate. So our materials consist of these two fields: Instagram posts and then personal blogs.
And we analyzed these texts from a discourse analytical perspective, focusing on positioning and representations. We looked at how these investing-related collaborations are positioned in relation to consumption-related campaigns, and how the influencers position themselves in relation to culturally recognizable and evolving influencer roles. And as a result, we identified 3 formulations that articulate the investing-related collaborations as renewal of relevance, or a long-term commitment, or as making concrete impact. And these formulations have specific effects in terms of focalizing particular relationships and representing the partner company, legitimizing a particular influencer role, and articulating a core aspirational message.
In the first formulation, investment represents a renewal of relevance. And this idea of renewal is based on the influencer's novice position when it comes to investing, as many of the influencers explicitly state that they are investing for the first time and do not have experience or expertise in this domain. And they express this kind of excitement for the novel position of the investor, and more specifically formulate the specific investor position of an investor in ethical fashion. And while this kind of shift in position relates to their self-brand, it the relation to the influencer community is also highlighted, as they refer to each other as a group of investors, or as one of the blogger puts it, as influencer investors, also coining a new term. And this formulation draws on a discourse of change and self-development, and the company appears more as a symbolic possession that represents something valuable in an identity-enhancing way for the influencers. And the influencers claim socially aware and re-energized influencer position, who is not just promoting an online store or the bags they design, but who has effectively become something new and exciting through the investing relatedness of these collaborations. And while the first formulation emphasizes this novelty, the second formulation highlights continuity. And here, investing-based collaboration is represented as a serious and long-term commitment. The influencers talk about starting or joining a common journey with the company, and conceptualize investing as the beginning or next step in a deepening connection with the brand. So they, for instance, emphasize how they have been customers and then become collaborators, and now also shareholders, and base this commitment on the company's ideology as a kind of a solid ground. And they also emphasize the fit between their personal taste and values, what they have always done and what they have always appreciated, with the things that the company represents as a way of expressing this kind of consistency and also perhaps as an authenticity strategy. So the relationship and continuing engagement between the influencer and the company becomes central in this formulation, as it highlights that they are not just collaborating for a one-off campaign, but are on a long-lasting journey as partners in ethical work. And in the third formulation, investing is represented as a way of making an impact and as a way of driving social change. The influencers emphasized investment as a concrete way of changing the fashion world for a better and more responsible direction. And here investing is then implicitly compared with consumption-based collaborations, which are seen as not as concrete in some way. The influencers use future-oriented and activist discourse as they articulate their reasons for participating in the crowdfunding, and also argue for the need for the followers to join. So they're stating, for instance, that together we are strong, and draw on the idea of this kind of collective impact. And they also engage in long reflections on their ongoing struggles over social and environmental issues, and highlight the pro-social rationale behind their participation as both ambassadors and investors. So in this formulation, investing in the company is represented as a way of directly funding its ethical work, and the collaborating company appears primarily as a vehicle for change.
So in our article, we have summarized the findings with this table that compares the different dimensions of the formulations. And in the last paragraph, we try to crystallize the kind of core message that arises from each formulation. So by investing, you or I can become something new and exciting, or by investing in an ethical brand, I and the brand can jointly co-construct ethicality, or by financially supporting ethical business, we can change the world together. So as you can see, these messages connect to ethicality and ethicality to varying extent. And in the actual social media discourse, of course, they are intertwined and they evolve dynamically. So to conclude, we agree with Johanna Andersen in that influencer marketing can provide ways and settings in which hegemonic discourses can be challenged. And in this study, we have analyzed on a micro level how that may happen as companies and influencers seek license to operate and come together in new ways. So in these investing-related collaborations, influencers harness positive meanings of investing for evolving influencer roles in ways that substantiate influencer power in new ways. And at the same time, they articulate investing through the lens of ethics and activism and influencer discourse, so that the meaning of investing is also changed. This change potential is of course limited, as investing-related collaborations represent quite of a niche phenomenon, and ultimately they rely on this capitalist market-based ideology. But however, in this focused context of fashion influencing, we argue that assuming the role of an ethical investor or owner may be considered something like a transformative act. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Will you unshare perhaps? Oh, you have the references there. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. To both of you, Heidi and Cecilia, any questions and comments? Well, I have one actually. I mean, I wonder, could this be called out as a case of greenwashing? I mean, how do they sort of juggle between, I guess you already touched upon this, but how do they juggle between, on the one hand, the ethical aspect, and on the other hand, fashion that is known to be one of the most sort of, not an industry that's particularly friendly to the climate, and that's coupled to consumption and etc. I mean, how do they make sense of that?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and of course, this could be interpreted as greenwashing if that's the interpretation you want to make. But like we have wanted to look at this from a different perspective, and also by focusing on what these kind of collaborations may mean for the influencer as such, because a lot of research focuses on how influencers are appropriated by companies or used, or so we wanted to look at it from that kind of perspective. And well, I think it has a lot to do with their, I don't know, personal reflections that they bring, and express that they have, and also be very honest and transparent about that they are not experienced, for instance, in the investing part, but then also tell that they have thought about these things, and they are fashion consumers, and they have made mistakes, and they have reflected on their own behavior, and maybe that's a strategy to circumvent this kind of idea that, oh, this is just greenwashing.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Maybe add that maybe this is also a situation where the authenticity aspect comes into play, or the consistency and the long-term connection of the influencer with the community, and so they have been following for a long time, and what they're doing, and what their values, how they express their values and build on them, and so on. So yeah.
Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I'm not actually quite sure what I want to ask you, but I think it's a really rich and interesting case. But I guess I wondered while reading your article, and also while listening to a presentation here, that they are really seductive. These influencers, they're really, really good at trying to convince other people to invest, and there's no risk at all in their universe here. Also, and that's because I thought these are small companies, and of course that's part of the interesting thing about your analysis. But if you know something about the fashion industry, you also know that it's a really risky industry, and companies rise and they go down again. So well, I just thought that they're really good at promoting these two companies.
Yes, that's a very good perspective, and thank you for the comment. And absolutely, it's a risky business, and they might lose their money. But what we wanted also to emphasize in the article was that they do not operate on the promise of profit, and well, at all. But it's a small part of the discourse. What is interesting for us in terms of like discourses and meanings of investing here is that they really like bring out these niche or marginal angles to what it might mean to invest in a company. It's not so that it is not primarily about expecting profit. It's about connecting to this company and extending your like identity by becoming an owner in a brand that you like. So that is maybe something that we can say for these influencers. But absolutely, this is a question that always arises, and of course there are people's money involved. So this is absolutely an aspect that should be discussed, and maybe it's also an aspect that these influencers should discuss more in their channels and in their publications.
Thank you. We have 3 hands up. Andreas first.
Yeah, thank you so much. I sort of I'm also sort of just a little bit fascinated with the whole thing. Sort of your answer to Anu sort of made it sort of, I mean, in one way, it's completely in contrast to what we see, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of there's always the sell of like you're going to make 6 figures on this, and now you're saying sort of this is not about making money, but it is about spending money. And I'm kind of, it does sound like a hustle to some extent, like sort of you don't expect any payout here. It's sort of purely for values and these kinds of things. So I'm a little worried about that. But I want to like sort of hear if you have something to say about something different. I said which also piggybacks on what Anna said, is sort of that fashion and consumption is typically seen as a kind of in the now, in the moment kind of thing. And I wanted to hear your reflections on sort of how much of traditional fashion-oriented or consumption-oriented or beauty-oriented, all that stuff. I just see that as pretty much sort of like go out and buy something in the moment, but you're sort of opening up for sort of a much more long-term commitment. And I'm sort of I have one student who's working on skincare these sort of days, and there's very much sort of a loyalty to a brand that works for them in a sense, sort of. So do you see that kind of, I mean, is this long-term thing, is that in contrast to what these people are doing normally? Or is it like, do they have a long-term strategy that they perform in a way also outside of investing? Thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a very good question.
But I think at least, well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm not so familiar with these influencers myself, but in some of the examples, we can see that they have been partners with these brands already longer as like a brand ambassadors and in different roles. So there are these longer term partnerships, and I think this is also something that is happening in the influencer industry more broadly. Yeah,
I'm just a little fascinated.
Kinds of.
It just struck me that some of the most successful ones, like Mathilde Jaff, she's very loyal to her own brand. but the balancing this thing about sort of, I just find that fascinating. The whole short-term, long-term thing that you're opening here, sort of. But thank you.
Oops, Vilde, sorry. Should unmute.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question for Heidi and Cecilia, but I think it touched upon Andreas and Jakob's presentation as well, because Heidi and Cecilia, you started with the political and the promotional, and in the stock market now, or the influencers, there is a shift this since Christmas with everything going on in the United States. The stock market is not what it used to be. Investing money is not what it used to be. You know, it's far harder now. So I know this is an impossible question for you to really answer, you know, but it makes a shift in the dynamics of how to operate now. And I was thinking about, you know, the trade war, the trade blockade. How should you invest? And Heidi and Celia, you also talked about the ethical, you know, it could be environmental, but it could also be, you know, should you support the European? Should you sell your Tesla? Yeah. Any thoughts about how these big shifts that we are seeing now will impact influencers? Because, you know, they made a trade, they made their living out of some types of advice. And now even economics with PhDs do not grasp what's happening. So, you know, how should they grasp? Yeah. Any guesses on how this will turn? Yeah.
A question on the day after Liberation Day? Yep.
Oh, that was a really difficult question with many aspects, but yes, first of all, I think that this may be related to the other study that we are currently working on like influencers and female influencers. They have been promoting like this stock investing for everyone, and also like investment in like buildings and not buildings, apartments. Yes, apartments. Yes, that everyone should do that. And there have already been drastic changes in the apartment like real estate market, and it has become so much less profitable that it has been very difficult. So I think. I don't know. I just think that's an interesting question to see, because obviously it is not for everyone. It's not easy. There are big risks, and now they're realizing already. So we'll see. But the other question that was interesting to me was how do influencers and influencers think about this, like the companies stand on political issues. For example, the Tesla example. And I would actually like to hear what Jakob and Andreas have to say about that. Do we see this kind of political stances in your influencer material?
Well, yeah, sort of. We've been doing some work on Wall Street bets as well, and you can kind of see how they react to market news in a very different way than other actors might react to it. But that's a very idiosyncratic kind of investor community, or trading community. But nonetheless, it's important because I think it shows that there's really no easy answer to this, sort of how different sort of spaces of social media and finance will react to this. My hunch is that there is one strategy that probably isn't going to work that well now, because sort of in sort of the bull market where every line just goes up, and you're sort of, I think that's absolutely correct, Vilde, that won't fly these days. But I think sort of in market transitions and in periods of a lot of volatility, that actually I think opens up for these kind of more predatory strategies. So my money would be on sort of some high risk, high gain, and also pretty scammy tactics that we've been seeing in the crypto space a lot, where people sort of are promising, well, here's a safe haven, buy this, and then sort of the technical term is a rug pull, where you basically sort of have the people pulling out all their money. This is being recorded, but there are prominent politicians that have been doing that. So, and I think also the kind of thing that we're seeing with Tesla, I think that's not over yet. There are a lot of people who would say, so now is exactly the time to buy Tesla, because buy the dip, all of these things. There's just going to be a whole lot of discourse around this, I think. And as I said, sort of my money is on some of it being sort of really predatory, that they're going to be promising a lot of sort of tactics or strategies that now more than ever, listen to me, I know how to navigate this. So I think it's sort of it's probably a good for Hustleful. It's less good for the rest of us, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you. Annette, next question.
Hi, thank you very much. It was just a reflection, if I may. I was struck by how across the presentations, and very interesting, thank you so much for sharing your lovely work, how much it reminds me of earlier studies of other professions that have a kind of dark arts to persuasion. So I was thinking particularly of work I did in the paranormal profession. It feels like actually it's straight out of the playbook from the paranormal profession. So that was one thing to kind of explore. And another was, I was thinking of Raymond Boyle's wonderful work on the history and sort of industrialization of the entrepreneur. And again, going back to the 19th century, so both of those professions have been running for a long time, and they have really perfected the dark arts in persuasion and scams, and how to perform authenticity. And it was an answer to Andre's point, which is if we look at those professions, which I do think influencers borrow enormously from the entrepreneurial talent industry and from the paranormal professions, you know, not least with which influencers now, but really sort of crossing over skills. But it's that there is no bottom to the transactional relations around authenticity. There's literally no bottom. And I think it will go to a much darker place. If we look at historically how other claims of expertise and influence we know sort of will follow. So yeah, that was just a sort of comment there.
And what a cheery one.
Yeah.
No, but I completely agree. And thank you so much for the sort of the paranormal thing. There's a lot of that in the stuff that we look at as well. Very much true.
Do we want to end in this dark place? Or, I mean, isn't there some sort of transition in crisis? Isn't there some sort of way out of polarization?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Say something happy, go out and buy more. No.
I could say something completely different. No, not completely, but I want to say thank you very much again for joining us for this and also contributing, of course, to this really amazing, great panel, great presentations, as well as discussion.